Hello, and thank you for choosing this heartfelt, modest historical romance by C.E. Mallery. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support is appreciated and helps us continue bringing you more captivating tales, completely free. In each story are bits and pieces of true accounts of my personal life. So grab a pillow and make yourself at home and let your imagination transport you to a world of love, courage, and adventure in a time long past. Enjoy the story. I never thought I'd see the day when the sound of my own stomach would drown out the wind. The prairie has a way of making a person feel small, but hunger, real gnawing hunger, makes you feel invisible. I walked into Riverbend with nothing but the clothes on my back and the memory of John's last smile, the one he gave me before stepping out into the blizzard that took him from me. It's been 3 months since that day. 3 months since I watched him, bundled in every scrap of wool we owned, trudge through the snow to fetch firewood. I remember pressing my hand to the frosted window, watching his figure grow smaller and smaller, until the white swallowed him whole. He never made it back. I found him the next morning, just yards from the cabin, his face peaceful, as if he'd simply lain down to rest. I screamed until my throat was raw, but the only answer was the wind. Since then, the world has been a blur of cold nights and emptier days. I burned the last of the firewood, then the furniture, then anything that would catch. I stretched the flour and beans as far as I could, but the winter was long and cruel. When the last crust of bread was gone, I wrapped myself in John's coat and set out for Riverbend, hoping for mercy. The town looked the same as it always had, dusty, sun-bleached, and stubborn. I passed the church, the saloon, the blacksmiths, all bustling with life I felt shut out from. My boots scraped the wooden planks of the boardwalk as I made my way to the general store, the bell above the door jangling as I stepped inside. The smell of coffee and tobacco hit me first, then the sight of shelves lined with things I needed: flour, beans, salt, even a jar of sweet preserves. My mouth watered. I tried to stand tall, to look like I belonged, but I knew I didn't. Not anymore. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The storekeeper's eyes flicked over me, taking in the threadbare dress, the hollow cheeks, the desperation I couldn't hide. I need some food," I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Just a little. I can work for it if you need help sweeping or—" He cut me off with a shake of his head. "No work here, and no handouts neither. Times are hard for everyone." I felt my face flush hot with shame. "Please, I lost my husband. I have nothing left." He looked away, busying himself behind the counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't help you." I stood there a moment longer, hoping he'd change his mind. He didn't. The bell jangled again as he opened the door and gestured for me to leave. I stepped out into the sunlight, blinking back tears, my heart pounding with humiliation and fear. I sank down onto the curb, pulling my knees to my chest. The world spun around me, wagons rattling by, children laughing, the distant clang of a hammer on anvil. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. The ache in my belly was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, wishing for John, for warmth, for a kindness I wasn't sure existed anymore. I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that I couldn't give up. Not yet. Not while there was still a sliver of hope left in me, no matter how small. I sat on that curb for what felt like hours, the sun climbing higher, baking the dust into my skin. My pride stung worse than my hunger. I tried to swallow it down, but it stuck in my throat, bitter and sharp. I watched the townsfolk pass by. Some glanced my way, most didn't. A few women whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes darting from my tangled hair to my worn boots. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the cracks of the boardwalk and never be seen again. A little boy, no older than 6, tugged at his mother's skirt as they walked past. "Mama, why's that lady crying?" he asked, his voice clear and innocent. She hushed him quickly, pulling him along, her eyes fixed straight ahead. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand, wishing I could hide my shame as easily as she hid her pity. The ache in my stomach twisted tighter. I thought about the last meal I'd eaten. A heel of bread, stale and hard, washed down with melted snow. I remembered John's hands, rough and gentle, breaking the bread in half so I'd have more. I pressed my palm to my chest, as if I could hold the memory in place, keep it from slipping away. A wagon rattled by, its wheels kicking up a cloud of dust. I coughed, blinking grit from my eyes. The world felt too big, too loud, and I felt smaller than ever. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled beneath me. I leaned against the post outside the store, willing myself not to faint. A shadow fell over me. I looked up, squinting against the sun. The storekeeper stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face set in a hard line. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're scaring off customers." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught. What could I say? That I had nowhere else to go? That I was hungry and alone and desperate for a scrap of kindness? He didn't care. None of them did. He stepped closer, his boots inches from my skirt. "Go on now," he said, softer this time. "Find somewhere else." I pushed myself to my feet, swaying a little. My head spun, but I forced myself to walk, one foot in front of the other, down the boardwalk and away from the store. I kept my eyes on the ground, too ashamed to meet anyone's gaze. I wandered the streets, searching for a place to rest, a place where I wouldn't be noticed. I passed the church, its doors open wide, the sound of a hymn drifting out. Oh, how sweet the sound. I remembered. I asked them first for help, but they graciously said they were out of money, and how sorry they were they couldn't help. I thought about going inside, but I couldn't bring myself to face the congregation, not like this. I found a narrow alley behind the livery stable, shaded and quiet. I sank down against the cool brick, pulling my knees to my chest. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of John's laughter, the warmth of his arms around me. I tried to remember what hope felt like. But all I felt was empty. Empty and afraid, with nothing but the echo of my own heartbeat for company. I pressed my face into my hands and let the tears come, silent and hot, until there was nothing left but the hollow ache of longing. I didn't know how much longer I could go on like this, but I knew I had to try, for John, for myself, for the faint, stubborn hope that somewhere in this hard, wild land there was still a place for me. I don't know how long I sat there in the shade, letting the world pass me by. The alley was cool, but the ache in my bones only deepened. I must have drifted somewhere between sleep and waking, because the next thing I remember is the sound of boots crunching on gravel, slow and steady, coming closer. I tensed, drawing my knees tighter, bracing for another harsh word or a shove to move along, but the footsteps stopped just a few feet away, and a gentle voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I looked up, blinking against the sudden brightness. A man stood before me, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp white shirt and a dark vest that looked too fine for this dusty town. His hat was tipped back, revealing a face both handsome and kind, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a mouth that seemed made for smiling. I tried to answer, but my voice caught. I must have looked a fright, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with tears, dress stained with dust. Still, he didn't flinch or look away. He crouched down so we were eye to eye, his gaze steady and warm. "I saw you outside the store," he said softly. "You look like you could use a friend." The words nearly undid me. I pressed my lips together, fighting the urge to sob. I wanted to tell him everything, the hunger, the loss, the way the world had turned its back on me, but all I managed was a shaky nod. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, offering it to me. I took it, my fingers trembling, and wiped my face. The cloth smelled faintly of soap and something clean like fresh linen. "My name's Samuel Carter," he said, his voice gentle. "I just bought the Carter Ranch, out past the river. I came into town to see about some business at the bank, but I reckon that can wait." I stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had spoken to me with such kindness in months. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, a mix of hope and fear. He stood and offered me his hand. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." I hesitated, pride warring with desperation. but my hunger won out. I let him help me to my feet, surprised by the strength in his grip and the gentleness in his touch. We walked together down the main street, his presence a shield against the curious stares and whispered gossip. He led me to the diner, a small place with checkered curtains and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. The woman behind the counter looked at me with suspicion, but Samuel's easy smile and quiet authority seemed to put her at ease. He ordered coffee and stew for both of us, and when the food arrived, I nearly wept at the sight of it. I tried to eat slowly, but hunger got the better of me. Samuel watched without judgment, only refilling my cup and urging me to take more bread. As I ate, he told me about his ranch, how he'd come west from Virginia, how he'd worked hard to build a new life, how he believed in second chances. I listened, drawn in by the warmth of his voice and the honesty in his eyes. When I finally set my spoon down, full for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. The world didn't seem quite so cold or so hopeless. For the first time since John died, I felt seen. I felt safe. Samuel smiled at me, and I found myself smiling back, shy and uncertain but real. In that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, kindness could be enough to start again. And as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting the world in gold, I let myself believe in the possibility of hope. Samuel insisted I stay the night at his ranch. I tried to protest, to tell him I'd be fine in the livery or even curled up in the church pews, but he wouldn't hear of it. "No one should sleep hungry or alone if I can help it," he said, and there was a quiet conviction in his voice that made it impossible to argue. We rode out of town in his wagon, the sun dipping low behind the cottonwoods, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, feeling awkward and out of place. The silence between us was gentle, not heavy, and I found myself watching the way the light caught in his hair, the way his hands held the reins, steady, sure, as if he'd been born to this land. The Carter Ranch was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Fences stretched out in every direction, and the main house stood proud and white against the prairie, its porch wrapped in climbing roses. I felt a pang of longing, remembering the tiny cabin John and I had built with our own hands, but I pushed it aside. This was Samuel's world, not mine. He helped me down from the wagon and led me inside. The house was warm and filled with the scent of baking bread and wood smoke. A woman in a blue dress, his housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, greeted us with a kind smile and a fuss over my thinness. She pressed a cup of tea into my hands and ushered me to a chair by the fire, where I sank gratefully into the cushions. Samuel disappeared for a while, tending to the horses and seeing to the evening chores. I watched the flames dance in the hearth, letting the warmth seep into my bones. Mrs. Finch brought me a plate of roast chicken and potatoes, and I ate slowly, savoring every bite. She asked no questions, only patted my hand and told me to rest. Later, Samuel returned, his hair damp from washing and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He sat across from me, his eyes soft in the firelight. "You're safe here, Abby," he said quietly. "You can stay as long as you need." I wanted to thank him, to tell him how much his kindness meant, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I nodded, blinking back tears. He didn't press me, just smiled and told me about the ranch, how he'd bought it from an old cattleman looking to retire, how he hoped to make it the finest spread in the territory. He spoke of the land with a reverence I understood, the way it could break your heart and heal it all at once. As the night deepened, Mrs. Finch showed me to a small room at the end of the hall. The bed was soft, the quilt thick and warm. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the quiet creak of the house settling, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind whispering through the cottonwoods. For the first time in months, I felt safe. I let myself remember John, not the way he died, but the way he lived, the way he loved me. I whispered a prayer for him, for myself, for this strange new life that had found me. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless. And in the morning, when the sun spilled through the window and the scent of coffee drifted up from the kitchen, I woke with something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, but I carried the weight of my past with every step. Samuel and Mrs. Finch treated me with a kindness that was almost foreign, and I found myself both grateful and uneasy. Each morning I woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of fresh bread, and for a moment I could almost believe I belonged here. But as soon as I opened my eyes, the ache of loss returned, sharp and insistent. I tried to help where I could, sweeping the porch, peeling potatoes, mending shirts by the window where the light was best. Mrs. Finch fussed over me, insisting I rest, but I needed to keep my hands busy. If I stopped, the memories would creep in. John's laughter echoing in the cabin, the way he'd tuck a wildflower behind my ear, the warmth of his arms around me on cold nights. I missed him with a fierceness that sometimes took my breath away. One afternoon I found myself standing at the edge of the pasture, watching Samuel work with the horses. He moved with an easy confidence, his voice low and soothing as he calmed a skittish colt. I admired the way he treated the animals, with patience, never force. He caught me watching and waved me over, a smile lighting his face. "Ever ridden before?" he asked, offering me the reins. I hesitated, memories of John teaching me to ride flickering through my mind. I shook my head, but Samuel only grinned. "No time like the present." He helped me onto the horse, his hand steady at my waist. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, embarrassed by how long it had been since anyone had touched me with such care. He walked beside me as I rode, guiding the horse with gentle words. I laughed, surprised at the sound, and for a moment the heaviness in my chest eased. But that night, as I lay in the soft bed, guilt crept in. I thought of John, how he'd loved me, how I'd promised to love him forever. Was it a betrayal to feel happiness again, even for a moment? Was it wrong to let another man's kindness warm the places in me that had gone cold? I pressed my face into the pillow, tears slipping down my cheeks. I whispered apologies to John, to myself, to the empty darkness. I didn't know how to let go of the past, or if I even wanted to. All I knew was that I was caught between two worlds, the life I'd lost and the one that was slowly, quietly opening before me. In the morning, I found Samuel waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He offered me one, his eyes searching mine. "You don't have to talk about it," he said softly. "But you don't have to carry it alone either." I took the cup, my hands trembling. I didn't have the words to thank him. Not yet. But as we sat together in the golden light of dawn, I felt something shift inside me, a tiny, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to live again. The days grew longer and warmer, and with each sunrise I found myself drawn more and more to Samuel. There was a gentleness in him that I hadn't expected, a patience that made it easy to breathe, even when the ache of missing John threatened to swallow me whole. I watched him work the land, his sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his brow, and I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten the shape of it. We spent our afternoons together, riding the fence lines or tending the garden behind the house. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch in the cool of the evening, sharing stories as the sky faded from gold to indigo. Samuel told me about his childhood in Virginia, about the war and the long, lonely journey west. I listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes quiet, and sometimes I'd find myself telling him things I'd never spoken aloud, not even to John. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the cottonwoods, Samuel turned to me, his eyes soft and searching. "You remind me of spring, Abby," he said quietly. "You bring life back to this place." I felt my cheeks flush, my heart fluttering in my chest. I wanted to tell him how much his kindness meant to me, how his presence had become a balm to my wounded soul, but the words tangled on my tongue. Instead, I reached out and touched his hand, just for a moment, and the warmth of his skin sent a shiver through me. It terrified me, this feeling. I'd loved John with every part of myself, and the thought of loving again felt like a betrayal. But Samuel never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. He simply offered his company, his laughter, his steady presence, and let me come to him in my own time. One afternoon, as we rode out to check the cattle, a sudden summer storm rolled in. We took shelter beneath a stand of cottonwoods, rain drumming on the leaves above us. I laughed, breathless and soaked, and Samuel grinned at me, his hair plastered to his forehead. In that moment, something inside me broke free, a wild, reckless joy I hadn't felt in years. When the rain eased, we rode back to the ranch, our clothes clinging to our skin, and I caught Samuel watching me with a look I couldn't quite name. That night, as I lay in bed, I pressed my fingers to my lips, remembering the way he'd smiled at me, the way my heart had leapt in my chest. I was falling in love. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I wanted to run from it, to hide behind the safety of my grief, but I couldn't deny the truth any longer. Samuel had become the light in my darkness, the hope I'd thought I'd lost forever. And as the days slipped by, I found myself reaching for him, not just in moments of need, but in moments of joy. I laughed more easily, slept more soundly, and for the first time since John's death, I began to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loss. But with that hope came fear. I knew how quickly happiness could be snatched away, how fragile love could be. I was terrified of losing again, of opening my heart only to have it broken. Yet every time Samuel looked at me, every time he took my hand or brushed a stray curl from my cheek, I felt the walls around my heart begin to crumble. I was falling in love, and there was no turning back. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Riverbend was a small town, and nothing stayed secret for long, not even the slow, careful way Samuel and I began to orbit each other. At first, it was just a few glances, a couple of women pausing their conversation as I passed by on my way to the general store, their eyes lingering a little too long. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the errands Samuel sent me to town for, but the weight of their stares pressed on me like a stone. One morning, as I waited for flour at the counter, Mrs. Hargrove leaned in close, her voice low and syrupy. "I hear you've made yourself quite comfortable out at the Carter place, Abby Annie. Folks are starting to wonder just what you're doing to earn your keep." Her words stung, sharp as a slap, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. I mumbled something about helping with chores, but she just smiled, thin and cold, and turned away. The gossip grew louder after that. I heard it in the way the men at the blacksmith shop fell silent when I walked by, in the way the general store's wife pursed her lips when she saw me walking by. Even Mrs. Finch, who had always been kind, seemed more guarded, her eyes flicking between Samuel and me with a new wariness. I tried to hold my head high, to remind myself that I had done nothing wrong, but the old insecurities crept in, whispering that I didn't belong here, that I was nothing but a burden and a scandal. I found myself pulling away from Samuel, making excuses to avoid the long rides and quiet evenings on the porch. I didn't want to bring him trouble, didn't want to be the reason his name was dragged through the mud. One night, as I sat alone in my room, I heard voices drifting up from the porch, Samuel and Mrs. Finch, their words muffled but tense. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding. "She's a good woman, Samuel," Mrs. Finch was saying, "but folks are talking. You know how this town can be." "I really don't care what they say," Samuel replied, his voice hard. "Abby's been through enough. She deserves kindness, not judgment." His words should have comforted me, but instead they filled me with dread. I didn't want to be the cause of trouble for him, didn't want to see the respect he'd earned in this town tarnished because of me. The next morning I found Samuel in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. I stood in the doorway, twisting my hands together, searching for the right words. "Samuel," I began, my voice trembling, "maybe it's best if I find somewhere else to stay. I don't want to cause you any more trouble." He turned to me, his eyes fierce and gentle all at once. "You're not going anywhere, Abby. Let them talk. I know who you are, and that's all that matters to me." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I looked away, ashamed of how much his words meant to me. He crossed the barn in 2 strides and took my hands in his touch warm and steady. "Don't let them steal your happiness," he said softly. "You've earned every bit of it." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let his faith in me be enough. But the fear lingered, a shadow at the edge of every joy. I knew the cost of love in a world that didn't always understand it. I knew how quickly happiness could be taken away. Still, as Samuel pulled me into his arms and held me close, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than the whispers. The night of the harvest dance arrived with a chill in the air and a sky full of stars. I stood in front of the small mirror in my borrowed room at Samuel's ranch, smoothing the faded blue dress Mrs. Finch had pressed for me. My hands trembled as I pinned up my hair, nerves fluttering in my stomach. I hadn't been to a dance since before John died, and the thought of stepping into that crowded hall, of being seen and judged, made my heart race. Samuel waited for me outside, his wagon hitched and lanterns glowing softly. He wore a crisp white shirt and a dark vest, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes were gentle and reassuring. "You look beautiful, Abby," he said, offering his arm. I hesitated, but his smile gave me courage, and I let him help me up into the wagon. The town hall was alive with music and laughter, lanterns strung from the rafters casting golden light over the crowd. I felt every eye on me as we entered, whispers trailing in our wake. For a moment I wanted to turn and run, but Samuel's hand found mine, steady and warm. "Let them talk," he whispered. "Tonight is for us." We danced together, awkward at first, then easier as the music carried us. I let myself laugh, the sound strange and wonderful in my own ears. Samuel spun me around the floor, his touch gentle, his gaze never leaving mine. For the first time in so long, I felt light, almost free. As the night wore on, the music slowed, and Samuel led me outside to the porch, away from the noise and the stairs. The air was cool, the scent of autumn leaves drifting on the breeze. He took my hands in his voice low and earnest. "Abby, I know you've been through more than most. I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel. You've brought light back into my life." Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't look away. "I'm scared, Samuel. I don't know if I'm ready." He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle. "I'll wait as long as you need. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore." In that quiet moment, with the music drifting through the open door and the stars shining above, Samuel leaned in and kissed me, soft and hesitant, but full of hope. My heart ached with the memory of John, but it also fluttered with something new, something I hadn't dared to feel in so long. When we returned to the dance hand in hand, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. For the first time since I'd come to Riverbend, I let myself believe in the possibility of happiness again. The days after the dance felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Samuel and I moved through our chores with a new lightness, laughter coming easier, smiles lingering longer. Even the townsfolk seemed to soften, their glances less sharp, their greetings warmer. For the first time since John's death, I let myself believe that happiness might last. But the prairie has a way of reminding you how quickly fortunes can change. It started with a sense of unease. Samuel coming in late from meetings in town, his brow furrowed, his words clipped. He tried to shield me from the details, but I heard enough to know that not everyone was pleased with his plans to buy the bank and expand the ranch. There were men in Riverbend who saw Samuel's success as a threat, men who whispered in back rooms and watched us with cold eyes. One evening, as the sun dropped low in the sky, though what a beautiful sunset, Samuel rode out to check the far pasture. I stayed behind helping Mrs. Finch with supper, but my mind wandered, worry gnawing at me. Sensing something wrong when Samuel hadn't returned by nightfall, I stood on the porch, straining to hear the sound of his horse. That's when I saw the glow, orange and angry, rising from the direction of the barn. My heart lurched. "Fire!" I screamed, racing across the yard, skirts flying. Mrs. Finch followed, shouting for help. Flames licked the sky, devouring the dry wood of the barn. The horses inside screamed, their terror cutting through the roar of the fire. I didn't think. I just ran, grabbing a bucket and throwing water at the flames, though it did little good. The heat was blistering, the smoke choking, but all I could think of was the animals trapped inside. Samuel appeared out of the darkness, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wild with fear. I looked at him and suddenly a spark caught the end of my dress. "Abby, get back!" he shouted. But I was already at the barn door, struggling with the latch, and now the flames were going up my dress. He was beside me in an instant, dousing me with a bucket of water. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, let's get these animals to safety," I said, and together we wrenched the door open, the flames surging with a hungry roar. We freed the horses, driving them out into the night, coughing and gasping for breath. My arms ached, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop until every animal was safe. Only then did I collapse to my knees in the dirt, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Samuel knelt beside me, pulling me into his arms. His shirt was singed, his hands blistered, but his grip was strong. "You could have been killed," he whispered, his voice raw with fear and something deeper. "I couldn't let them die," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "I couldn't lose anyone else." He held me tighter, his heart pounding against mine. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of what we'd built, I realized just how much I loved him. It wasn't the easy, innocent love I'd known before. It was fierce and desperate, born of loss and forged in fire. The townsfolk arrived, buckets in hand, but by then the barn was lost. They helped us douse the last of the flames, their faces grim. I saw the suspicion in their eyes, the unspoken question of who would do such a thing. Samuel's rivals, I knew, but there was no proof. Only the knowledge that happiness in this world was always hard-won. That night, as we sat together on the porch, watching the embers die, Samuel took my hand in his. "I won't let them drive us out, Abby," he said, his voice steady. "We'll rebuild, together." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I was terrified, of the danger, of the future, of how much I stood to lose. But I was also certain of one thing. I would fight for this love, no matter the cost. In the darkness, with Samuel's arms around me and the scent of smoke still clinging to my hair, I knew I had found something worth risking everything for. Samuel's injuries were worse than he let on. In the days after the fire, he tried to hide the pain, but I saw the way he winced when he moved, the way his hands shook as he tried to hold a coffee cup. The doctor came out from town, wrapped his burns, and warned him to rest, but Samuel was stubborn as a mule. "There's too much to do," he grumbled, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. I took over the chores with Mrs. Finch's help, tending the animals and salvaging what we could from the barn's charred remains. The ranch felt quieter, emptier, as if the fire had burned away not just wood and hay, but a piece of our hope. I tried to keep busy, but every time I passed the blackened ruins, a wave of guilt and helplessness washed over me. I replayed the night in my mind, wondering if I could have done more, if I'd put Samuel in danger by insisting on saving the horses. One evening, as I sat by Samuel's bedside, dabbing ointment on his burns, he caught my hand in his. "You're not to blame, Abby," he said softly, reading the worry in my face. "If anything, you saved me. You saved all of us." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I should have listened. I should have let you handle it. I'm so tired, Samuel. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." He squeezed my hand, his grip weak but determined. "You're the strongest person I know. You've survived more than most ever will, but you don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." His words broke something open in me. I realized how much I'd been holding back, how afraid I was to lean on someone else, to let myself be loved again. I thought of John, of the promises I'd made to him, and how I'd clung to my grief like a shield. But Samuel's love was different. Steadier, quieter, but no less fierce. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the scent of smoke still lingered in the air, I made a decision. I went to Samuel's room, my heart pounding, and sat beside him in the darkness. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice trembling. "Maybe it's time I moved on. Maybe I should find work in town or—" He sat up, pain flashing across his face. "No, Abby, don't say that. I need you here, not just for the ranch, for me." I looked at him, really looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't asking me to stay out of obligation or pity. He loved me, and I loved him so much it scared me. "I love you, Samuel," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I do. He reached for me, pulling me into his arms, careful of his wounds. "I love you too, Abby. I have from the moment I saw you in the street." We held each other, the weight of our losses and fears melting away in the warmth of our embrace. I knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be more fires, more storms, more nights when hope felt out of reach. But I also knew we would face them together. In the days that followed, we began to rebuild, not just the barn, but our lives. The townsfolk, seeing our determination, offered help. Lumber, labor, even a few kind words. Slowly, the ranch came back to life, and so did I. I learned that love isn't just about joy and laughter. Sometimes it's about sacrifice, about holding on when everything around you is falling apart, about choosing each other again and again, no matter the cost. And as I watched Samuel heal, as I watched the ranch rise from the ashes, I realized I was healing too. I was no longer just surviving. I was living, loving, and finally letting myself be loved in return. Spring came early that year, as if the land itself was eager to see us begin again. The charred skeleton of the old barn was torn down, and in its place, Samuel and I, along with half the men in Riverbend, raised a new one, beam by beam, laughter and sweat mixing with the scent of fresh-cut wood. The work was hard, but it was honest, and every nail I hammered felt like a promise to myself that I would not let sorrow define me any longer. The townsfolk who once whispered behind my back now greeted me with nods and smiles. Mrs. Hargrove even brought over a pie, her eyes soft with something like apology. I saw the change in them, saw how their suspicion faded as they watched Samuel and me shoulder the burdens together, never flinching, never giving up. I realized then that belonging wasn't something you were given. It was something you earned, day by day, with kindness and grit. Samuel's wounds healed slowly, but he never complained. I caught him watching me sometimes, a quiet pride in his eyes as I wrangled a stubborn calf or bargained for seed in the market. He started calling me his partner, and the word filled me with a warmth I'd thought I'd lost forever. We worked side by side, planting the orchard he'd always dreamed of, our hands stained with earth and hope. One afternoon, as we rested beneath the cottonwoods, Samuel took my hand in his. "You've given me more than I ever hoped for, Abby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me a home." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. "You gave me a second chance," I whispered. "You taught me how to live again." There were still hard days, nights when the wind howled and I woke from dreams of snow and loss. Mornings when the ache of missing John caught me off guard. But Samuel was always there, steady and patient, never asking me to forget, only to keep moving forward. I learned that love could hold both joy and sorrow, that it could make room for the past while still reaching for the future. The ranch flourished, the orchard's first blossoms promising fruit to come. Mrs. Finch started humming as she worked, and even the horses seemed to carry their heads higher. I found myself laughing more, singing as I swept the porch, feeling the weight of grief lift, little by little, with every sunrise. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky blazed with color, Samuel pulled me close and kissed me, slow and sure. "We made it, Abby," he murmured against my hair. "We're home." And as I looked out over the land we'd rebuilt together, I knew he was right. I was no longer a stranger, no longer just a survivor. I was a part of Riverbend, a part of Samuel, a part of something strong and enduring. I was home. The morning of our wedding dawned soft and golden, the kind of day that feels like a blessing. I woke before the sun, nerves fluttering in my stomach, and slipped outside to stand beneath the cottonwoods. The orchard Samuel and I had planted was in bloom, the air sweet with the promise of new beginnings. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, letting the peace of the land settle over me. Mrs. Finch found me there, her arms full of wildflowers. "You'll need these," she said, tucking a sprig of lilac behind my ear. Her eyes shone with pride and something like motherly love. "You're ready, Abby. You've been ready for a long time." The townsfolk gathered at the edge of the river, where the water ran clear and the grass grew tall. Samuel stood waiting for me beneath the cottonwoods, his suit pressed, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes were as wild and hopeful as the first day I met him. I walked to him on trembling legs, my heart pounding with joy and disbelief. I could feel John's memory with me, not as a shadow, but as a gentle warmth, a blessing for the life I was about to begin. The preacher spoke simple words, but they rang true and deep. Samuel took my hands in his grip steady and sure. "I promise to love you, Abby Annie, for all my days," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To build a life with you, to weather every storm, to cherish every joy, and to make sure you never ever run out of firewood again." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I repeated my vows, my voice clear and strong. "I promise to love you, Samuel Carter, with all that I am, to honor the past, but to live for the future, to stand by your side, come what may." When he kissed me, the world seemed to hold its breath. The river sang, the cottonwoods whispered, and the townsfolk cheered. I felt the weight of sorrow lift from my shoulders, replaced by a lightness I'd never known. I was not the same woman who had stumbled into Riverbend, hungry and alone. I was not just a widow or a stranger or a survivor. I was a wife, a partner, a woman in love. The celebration lasted long into the night. Music and laughter, dancing beneath the stars, the taste of sweet cake and cider on my tongue. Samuel held me close, his arms strong and safe, and I knew I had found my home at last. As the fireflies danced and the moon rose high, I slipped away for a moment, standing at the edge of the orchard. I whispered a thank you to John, to the land, and to the Lord for the unpredictable life that had brought me here. I felt hope blooming inside me, fierce and bright. Samuel found me there, his hand warm in mine. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his smile soft and full of promise. I nodded, my heart overflowing. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." And together we walked back toward the house, the future wide and wild before us, love lighting every step. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more captivating tales. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless. See you in the next video.